Hey there, folks. Happy New Year. We've already said that, but we'll say it again and again and again. In fact, we may even begin saying it a year from now again, and a year after that. We are talking initially now about an article that was in the New York Post. I have as my guest Andrew McDiarmid, spelled a little different than you would think, to talk about an article that he has written that appeared in the New York Post. And this is something that's been on my heart. As we evangelical Christians say, we have these phrases that we use. It's been on my heart for a long time. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I've never written about it, but I was thrilled that Andrew McDiarmid had written about it. He is a senior fellow with the Discovery Institute. You know what a big fan I am of the Discovery Institute in Seattle. We've had so many Discovery Institute folks speak at Socrates in the City over the years, not least Stephen Meyer and so many others. I will not mention them now. But right now we have Andrew McDiarmid. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Now, you're originally from Scotland.
I am.
Hence
that wee country across the ocean.
Gesundheit. I'm sorry, what? You can't say. You've got to say that again. I like that.
Oh, yeah, the wee country across the ocean.
The wee country across the ocean.
And that might be better than Mel Gibson's accent in Braveheart. But,
something like that.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk to you about Braveheart. I want to talk to you about Randall Wallace, whom I've had the privilege of meeting, who spoke to you on your podcast about Braveheart and things Scottish. But first, I want to talk to you about this article you've written about technology that appeared in the New York Post a couple of days ago. If people want to find it and they can't spell your name, what is the title of the piece?
The title, they gave it a title such as, here's the only New Year resolution you ought to make, experts. So New Year's resolution should find it.
Okay, and it has to do with something that I mentioned has been on my mind and heart for a long time, is people's, it has struck me before I encountered you and you were proof of this. It always struck me that if we can fill every moment of our time with some distraction, it prevents us from thinking more deeply. That seems obvious, but we live in a culture that is addicted to distraction, addicted now to these screens, to these phones, where the universe is at our fingertips, and most of us would think, oh, that's a great thing, and in some ways it is, but in some ways it seems to me it's a terrible thing. So what do you say, sir, in your article on this subject that appeared in the New York Post 2 days ago?
Yeah, when you do bring the whole world into your pocket, that's a real temptation. That's a blessing in some ways, but it can also be a curse if we are not a tech boss. One of the things I'm trying to do is help people be a tech boss in their life. Keep that tech in check.
A tech what?
A tech boss.
Boss, B-O-S-S?
Yeah.
You mean to be in charge? That you're the boss. You're in charge of the tech. The tech is not in charge of you.
Correct. Yeah, and neither is big tech. And that's sort of how I encourage people. But Eric, it's a great question, and it's definitely something that the folks I worked with at the Post thought it would be good to start the year off with. Just this idea of thinking. We don't really know what we're missing anymore. We're living very reflexively as opposed to reflectively, where it's kind of knee-jerk reactions. There's not much conscious thought going on. And we do need to rein it in and be more in touch with that inner life again. As you know, James Allen's 1913 book, As a Man Thinketh, he says man is literally what he thinks. His character is the complete sum of all his thoughts. So who are we today? Who are we amongst all our gadgets? We're so much closer to the world's information and all the people that we could have access to, but who are we? And as you're fond of reminding people, the Socrates saying, the life unexamined is hardly worth living. And that's
you're getting to the issue, of course, of the difference. And this is at the heart of the problem with the so-called Enlightenment project going back several centuries now, is that we cannot confuse knowledge or information with wisdom. We cannot confuse intelligence with wisdom. You can be tremendously intelligent, you can be tremendously knowledgeable, you can be tremendously educated, and a fool. And this is a distinction that is rarely made. And so it seems to me, I mean, I remember Bill Clinton talking about, oh, we've got to get a laptop and every kid has to get a laptop. And I thought, well, that's a nice idea, but it doesn't solve the deeper issue of what you do with the information and the technology. Will you have the resources and the wisdom to deal with it? Because when you're talking about technology and information and Google, it cannot give you wisdom. And so it does seem to me that we're training ourselves to be shallow and actually foolish, or to be stupid, not to think more deeply. And your article, unfortunately, seems to prove what I've been fearing.
Indeed, Eric, you're right. Yeah, this is a problem, especially for young people, but really, we were young once. We're now in the digital age, so it's affecting all ages, everyone who uses these gadgets. You know, I came across this study recently. This was a study by researchers in Japan and England, and they recognized that, you know, in the scientific literature, there's a lot about human thinking, a lot of research done, but not so much on our thoughts about thinking. And they wanted to remedy that. So they did a study that encompassed 6 different experiments with participants in Japan and England. And what they wanted to do was study our thinking on thinking. And it was quite interesting. They had participants come into a quiet room. Before they went in, they were asked, how do you feel about sitting and doing nothing else for 20 minutes? And then they actually asked them to do it. They left their belongings behind, no smartphone, no watch. They couldn't get up and eat or walk around or sleep. All they could do was sit and think. And then they measured how they felt about the experience afterwards. And what they found was a significant increase in interest, enjoyment, and engagement, and less boredom amongst the participants than they thought they were going to experience, the participants, that is. So they were really studying our perceptions of thinking in the digital age and how we might proactively tend to avoid that experience, thinking it's going to be boring, thinking it's going to be useless. And they found that it's actually, very interesting for people to just sit there and do some of this.
I knew eventually there would be a backlash. In other words, for years now, I've been waiting for someone to say something like what you're saying and to begin dealing with what we've not dealt with. In other words, it seems to me that at some point, common sense people would say, you know what, I need to fast from this addictive thing. I need to find a way in my life to carve out pure time where I'm not distracted or tempted to be distracted. And so I guess practically speaking, if someone like our friends Michael Medved or Dennis Prager or others, they have a Sabbath because serious Orthodox Jews have a Sabbath. They take it very seriously. Most people do not. Most people just go from day to day to day to day to day. They don't have these kinds of seasons or these kinds of Sabbath rests or things. So I guess practically, what are some ways we can begin dealing with this problem?
Yeah, Eric, that's a good point. If you don't have a Sabbath, what are you going to do? You're just going day to day, moving into the next one. And you can really feel it mentally and physically and spiritually when you're doing that. It's just getting up every day and doing what you're doing. And there really is no let up. There's no coming away from these gadgets that connect us to all this information. And so we really do need a Sabbath. And if you don't take a whole day, if that's not your cup of tea, you can at least start building in sessions of thinking. Times when you put your phone aside, not even in your pocket, but just in the next room, in a bag somewhere, turn it off. Just get that away from you so you can start to turn inward. And I recommend to people, quite a few things actually. Take back the first and last hour of your day. Those hours belong to you and to your maker. And so, don't turn it on right away. And believe it or not, that's a hard thing to do. Not touch your phone for the first hour of the day. And I also recommend it for the last hour. Those are precious moments that you can do some thinking, do some reflecting, do some thinking about your near and far future, and just turn inward so that you can outward experience a better life.
There's so much to explore here. Folks, I'm talking to Andrew McDiarmid. It's spelled D-I-A-R-M-I-D, M-C-D-I-A-R-M-I-D. Andrew McDiarmid with the Discovery Institute. We'll be right. Folks, welcome back. Talking to Andrew McDiarmid, but it's spelled the Scottish way. M-C-D-I-A-R-M-I-D. And Andrew, you're with the Discovery Institute. You have an article in the New York Post that just appeared, if people want to find it, about how we've become addicted effectively to our phones. And what I was going to say, there are several things. First of all, I feel a lot of people use their phones for everything. And one of the ways practically that I think we can deal with this is not to do everything on your phone. In other words, not to, a lot of people read the Bible on their phone. And I would say, it's great to have it there if you're on a bus or someplace and you can't. But maybe if you read your Bible, if you're a Bible reader, read it in a book. Use the book in the morning. Or there are things kind of like that we can do, because I think part of it is this visceral addiction we have to go to this phone, whatever it is, and that there are many things we can do that we don't need to use the phone for. But what are other ways that you think practically people can deal with what is clearly as widespread a problem as there is?
Yes, Eric, great points. Yeah, and you're right. There are things we can do to mitigate our desire to be holding our sleek smartphone and iPad and even laptops, as much as we do. But the smartphone is definitely the biggie, because it can be kept in our pocket. It's right next to us. It's an extension of ourselves. And one way to stop that or to reduce it is to do less on it. Yes, so I would definitely advocate that. It's never sat well with me that we can have the Bible on our smartphone. It really hasn't. And I'm somebody who has tapped into it at times, just like all of us. It's there, it's convenient, but it just hasn't sit well with me somehow. And I'm definitely an advocate of picking up the paper Bible and just getting your nose into it. Something that's not just an app. It's sort of an insult to God to relegate the Bible to an app. But I once, took stock of all the apps I had on my phone. This must have been a year or two ago. I had 391 apps, Eric, and of those, only 20 were being used for any measurable time frame within the last week of my life when I did this. And so that right there tells me I can delete 90% of the apps, pick only a few things, as you say, to do with your phone, and leave the rest to other ways of doing it.
I was thinking that I do a lot of thinking about thinking, and of course Aristotle thought that God was thought, thinking, thought. Aristotle was mistaken, but thinking about thought has led me to think that we can often and need to trick ourselves into thinking. And one of the ways we can do that is through exercise, through doing something physical, or through listening to music, because on some level you're busy, you are distracted, but it frees your mind to drift and to go places that it can't if you just seated down looking at a phone. So if you're running or you're exercising, you're involved in some kind of sport, it's more difficult, and it gives you enough distraction so that your brain can drift. But I think we have to figure out ways to do that. For some people, it's gardening or kayaking, or I don't know what it is that people do, but to figure out ways so that you can at least daily free your mind to wander.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you're right. Take your nose out of the screen, pick a few things that you like to do, and that will give your mind and your body an excuse to start thinking. Yeah, you'll do it almost automatically. Something that you don't have to be staring at, you know. So in general, yeah, just pull yourself out of the screens. Give yourself 20 minutes a day or more, and do something that allows for your mind to wander. And Eric, that actually brings me to the 5 different types of thinking that this study actually looked at. You know, if people don't realize there's benefit to free thinking, to just thinking, they're not going to do it. That was the takeaway of the study. And so we kind of went over the different types of thinking the study did, and it's quite amazing. You know, daydreaming, we think of that as something, oh, wake up, you know, hello, McFly, you know, it's gotten a bad rap, but it's actually a good thing to do. It can help us alternate between fantasy and reality, which is better than going and living it out, all of our thoughts and ideas. We get to kind of alternate in that space. It can help us facilitate change and makes life bearable as well at any age. Mind wandering is another type of thinking. And that's that mental space, Eric, where we can find some pretty awesome thoughts if we give ourselves the opportunity. That's where you're going to get the creativity, the juices flowing, the eureka moments will come. That's the inventiveness. That's the space. It's your own mental space, and it's just letting your mind wander, letting your brain have a storm, if you will. There's also episodic future thinking, which is just what it sounds like, simulating mental futures. It's good to think about your past. You get that continuity, but you can also think about the future. So there's just different ways of thinking.
Do you write about these in this article? Where can people find these various modes of thinking that you're describing right now?
Yeah, I do mention some of them in the article, absolutely. And then the paper itself is called Thinking About Thinking. If you search in, I don't know, Google Scholar, that will come up. It's called
Thinking About Thinking. All right. Well, we're going to go to a break. Folks, I'm talking to Andrew McDiarmid, spelled McDiarmid. This is the Eric Metaxas Show, which is not spelled that way. We'll be right back. Folks, welcome back. I'm talking to a new friend from the Discovery Institute, with which you must be familiar, the Discovery Institute in Seattle. I'm going to be visiting with them at the end of this month with John Zmirak. But we are talking today with Andrew McDiarmid, who is talking about thinking about thinking, and a new article in the New York Post. So you mentioned the theologian, philosopher Jacques Ellul. Some people are familiar with Ellul, E-L-L-U-L. What does he have to say on this subject? What did he have to say?
Well, Eric, what a gift it was to discover Ellul's work. He was a French sociologist, theologian, and philosopher of technology before that was even cool. He was writing in the mid 20th century on a philosophy called technique. And I'll go into that in a second, but let me share some of his quotes. He wrote whole books on how he saw the technological society shaping humanity. And then he wrote books on the answer. You know, he saw Christians in particular as standing uniquely at the intersection of this material world and the eternal world. So he saw Christians not sitting on the sidelines in this debate over technology, but coming right in and saying, look, we can understand the material world and the eternal world, okay? And he thought it was our unique ability as Christ followers to affirm our freedom in the technological society and help others to do the same. Ellul said, the denizen of the technological state of the future will have everything his heart ever desired, except, of course, his freedom. And he also said that when we become conscious of that which determines our life, we attain the highest degree of freedom. So you can imagine, as I read his 1954 book, The Technological Society, I was eating this stuff up because he talks about a concept called technique, which in centuries past has been nothing special. It's just the way that artisans and workers hone their crafts and their tools to do their work. But Eric, when technique became modern and it became more associated with instrument rather than the user of the instrument, and more associated with efficiency rather than beauty and aesthetics and purpose, it started to change humanity, particularly when large technology companies are controlling this technique. Okay, and there's lots of different examples that I can give you, and you can think of a ton yourself. Big tech now dictates the way that we connect to information with other people, how we entertain ourselves, how we get news, right? And in small, almost indistinguishable ways, they are shaping our access to that. They're shaping the type of content they want us to get. Think Google, right? And manipulating the algorithm in the ways they want to. And they're just in control of how we access this information today.
No one could have envisioned that we would ever give so much power to so few over us. No one could have envisioned it. And of course, you don't do it consciously. You make small compromises, small decisions. Oh, that's more convenient. Yes, that's more convenient. Yes, that's more convenient. Yes, that's easier. And over time, as you're saying, and as we've been seeing, particularly recently, it's a kind of waking nightmare when you realize that you have given over parts of your soul and parts of your will, your volition. It's gone, and you are now being, whether you know it or don't, controlled. It's an extraordinary moment in human history that we now have the ability to be controlled or to, in other words, before we had a globalist society, before the internet, before these kinds of technologies, these things were simply impossible. But today they've become possible.
Correct. Yeah, and it's little things, but the little things add up, and they're very purposeful, Eric, in the little changes that they make. We're talking, Netflix and how it sets the next thing to play automatically, right? It takes the ability away for us to let the credits roll and think to ourselves, do I have the time? Should I be watching something else, or should I do something like sleep or spend time with my family or do my homework? Right? It's a little tiny thing, and sure, you can go into the settings and turn it off, but by default, it's there, right? It's also the iPhone. Remember the iPhone used to have a home button, right? You could come right back to home by pressing that button. Well, they took the button away. So now we've got to interact with our screen just a little differently, right? Very tiny thing, but it's again, shaping us and guiding us in the way that they would have us interact with their products. I hate to say it, but there's a big thing as well. The pregnant man emoji, Eric. Do you remember it was actually Apple that did that. They quietly loaded the pregnant man emoji onto millions of iPhones, right? They didn't ask us permission because ultimately you have to upgrade with iPhone. There's really Apple doesn't let you not keep up with the Joneses. And so there it was, the pregnant man emoji. If you wanted to keep your phone in good order, there it is sitting there waiting for you to use. That's a small thing, but it's also a huge thing. So there's many, many different examples of this technique, how big tech is shaping us. And at the end of the day, Eric, we just cannot trust companies with different values and visions than our own.
Well, that's putting it very mildly. I think we have to understand that listen, some of these folks are being led by greed and self-interest, and we understand that. And we have to be wary of that. But they now have tremendous power. So they say, well, we can improve things if we change this or change this. They can do tremendous things like that. But also, we have to be clear that the Chinese Communist Party, for example, via TikTok and Zoom and other things, they actually are explicitly nefarious in the sense that they don't merely care about the bottom line and their shareholders. They care about accruing power in the world. And if they can use technology to do that, there is absolutely nothing stopping them. They don't have scruples. Unfortunately, the folks at Apple and Google and those places also don't really seem to have scruples. So as much as I'm an advocate of the free market, to have a free market without virtue, without people who understand there's good and evil, and just because we can do something doesn't mean we ought to do something. We're really facing that in a new way. We'll be back, folks, a final segment with Andrew McDiarmid. Again, he's at the Discovery Institute. In the few minutes we have left, I want to talk to him about Randall Wallace and the film Braveheart. This is the Eric Metaxas Show. You can find us, you can find me at ericmetaxas.com. Folks, I'm talking to Andrew McDiarmid with the Discovery Institute. We're talking about technology. But before we go, Andrew, you're from Scotland, and you've been doing, you said, a podcast for these 23 or so years about Scotland, I guess, which is what brings you to speak to Randall Wallace, who wrote the film Braveheart. So tell us about that conversation.
Yeah. Well, I came to Scotland in 1990 at the tender age of 11, and I was from Edinburgh, Scotland's capital city, and I moved to South Texas, of all places, and got to enjoy the sunshine and the mosquitoes and the cheap living. But it was an adjustment. And as I was making that adjustment in 1995, Randall Wallace's film that he wrote, Braveheart, hit the big screen. And I, for the first time, got to see Scotland and Scottish history come to life in a way I had never experienced. And I mean, tears pouring down my cheeks. I was seeing William Wallace and the story of Scotland's fight for independence for the first time. And it truly changed my life. It ignited a fire in me that eventually led to me getting an opportunity to do a radio show called Simply Scottish on public radio. And at its peak, it's aired in various states and in Canada and Australia. And then we got it online in the advent of podcasting. So from 2011 on, I've been, again, promoting culture and Scottish music. And people enjoy it. There's a special place for Scotland in the collective mind and heart. And so it was awesome to catch up with Randall Wallace recently and thank him for impacting me so much. And it was rather surprising, Eric, that he said it impacted him just as much. Braveheart actually wrote him instead of the other way around. And so he had some interesting things to share about that. We talked about a lot of things, though, not just the movie, his illustrious career in Hollywood films, but also some surprising things, including how God is a master storyteller, watching us and seeing our whole story, not just parts of it. And we also talked about freedom, which, Eric, is a big thing in the movie Braveheart.
Well, I have to say I had the privilege of meeting Randall Wallace the year before I spoke at the National Prayer Breakfast. I spoke in 2012. He spoke in 2011, and he was there. I guess the year that I spoke, I met with him and got to talk with him. But, Braveheart is just one of the great films for many, many reasons. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but it resonates with people for so many reasons. And Mel Gibson seems to have a knack of finding those kinds of films. What do you think it is about Braveheart that has resonated with people over the now decades?
Well, I think as awesome as the special effects were, which were low tech at the time, the war scenes, great stuff. Mel Gibson, poured his everything into the movie, and that was evident. But I think the reason it resonates with so many people is that the story came to us from the hands of a master storyteller. Randall had a lot of practice telling stories by the time the seeds of William Wallace's story came to him. It was germinating over years, and he honed his craft. He learned to pull out relationships in Wallace's life. The woman that was killed at the hands of the English, his family members that he lost in the conflict, why he got into fighting for Scottish freedom. And it's just a master storyteller and his story. And those relationships we remember, the funny character Stephen, right, who comes to him from Ireland and is talking about the Almighty. And the Almighty allows him to fight with Wallace.
I'm not sure. I think if we can, we'll keep you on for another segment or two, or we may have to go to another guest and then come back to you. But, folks, that ends hour one. Andrew will be talking to you either shortly or less shortly. Folks, we'll be right back. Folks, we return to my conversation from hour one with Andrew McDiarmid. We were talking about his article in the New York Post about technology, and then at the end of hour one, we were segueing to his discussion on his own podcast with the great writer Randall Wallace, who, among other things, wrote the film Braveheart. It's hard to believe that that's already 1995. It's kind of amazing. But you were saying, Andrew, that Wallace understands, as a Christian, he is a Christian, understands the idea of God as a storyteller. And I think I wasn't expecting to do this, but in a funny way, when you think of God as a storyteller and you think of the idea of who we are as made in God's image, the idea of telling stories and narratives and so on and so forth is antithetical to the digital idea of information. If there is no God, we're just atomized bits of information, and there's no meaning, there's no grand narrative. That's the Enlightenment project. That's the hyper-rationalistic, scientistic, materialistic project that says there's no God, and therefore, we can almost become gods ourselves. And then there's this other idea, which you get when you talk about storytelling and what it means to be a person thinking and having wisdom. And it's interesting to me that that's one of the reasons Randall Wallace is a great storyteller. He kind of he taps into that idea. He understands that idea, as you obviously do.
That's a wonderful point, Eric. You're right. I mean, digital technology by default is a download, right? It's everything at once. And really, you look at Elon Musk and the efforts to be able to download and connect to our brain, right? Who needs the story to be told to us when we can have all aspects of it all at once? Yeah, that's a great point. With storytelling, you are, as the storyteller, are in charge of when you release details, and you're telling things one thing at a time. You don't give every detail to the person that's listening to your story all at once. You hold back. There's a beauty to that. There's an art to that. And you reveal things in time. And that is a classic hallmark of God Almighty. He reveals things in time, right? All things become beautiful in his time. And so you're right. It's very antithetical to today's modern technological idea where we can get it all, right? Google is getting it all at once, give us a million results, and we have it all in our pocket. Well, that really isn't how we're designed. And it's not really how God operates.
Well, when we think of the idea of wisdom is completely different and often antithetical to information and knowledge. You can be a mad genius who uses his intellect to do great harm. Science, of course, can do tremendous harm just as it can do great good. But we've all, whether we know it or don't, bought into this larger narrative over the last centuries that all progress is good and we're drifting forward to, and it kind of ties into the idea of evolution, that we're all evolving towards something better, which is simply untrue on many levels. We don't have time to get into that, but we've bought into that larger narrative, and we forget that things can evolve or drift or trend in horrible directions, in wicked directions, and we act like, well, no, that's not true. We've kind of bought into these things. Now, for people who are not familiar with the film Braveheart, if you don't mind, tell me two things. First of all, how can people find your podcast on it?
Absolutely, yeah. The podcast is called Simply Scottish, and it's available on all major podcast platforms. And I'm also starting to make a foray into YouTube as well. So you can find my Randall Wallace interview on YouTube. But simplyscottish.com is where you'll find all the podcasts.
Okay, and then the second question is for those who are unfamiliar, and there are many, because I keep forgetting how long ago 1995 is for some people. It predates the birth of some listening right now. What is the general story behind Braveheart? Or what is the story of Braveheart?
William Wallace, he was not a noble man. He didn't come from noble birth. His father was a common landowner. And this is the late 13th century, right? So he was born in the 1270s, and he was pulled into this conflict between Scotland and England and in particular, Edward I, who really had a thing for wanting to conquer the Scots. He saw Scotland as another fiefdom, as a place that he could also reign and rule. But he underestimated the Scots in a lot of ways, the English king, and Wallace was brought into this conflict and saw in the vacuum of power between Scotland and England, the Scottish king had died. There wasn't a strong person leading the country at the time. Edward the Longshanks took advantage of this and brought in the military and started to say, you're going to do it our way. And the Scottish people rebelled. But until Wallace rose up, there really wasn't anybody pushing back and fighting back that could withstand what England was throwing at them. And the idea of Wallace is largely legendary because not much is known about him prior to 1297 or so. And so all we know about him is really the military campaign. We don't really know exactly why he came into it, but the idea is that he lost his love, his wife, to the hands of the English, and possibly his father and brother were fighting in the conflict too and lost their lives. But he came into it, he gave his all, and for a good handful of years, he brought the conflict to the English and won several key battles and really rallied the troops and even inspired the Scottish nobles who had allegiances with the English for different reasons, inspired them to a better cause, including the King Robert the Bruce, who then rose up and secured Scotland's freedom by 1314 and the Battle of Bannockburn. So quite the story.
I like the way you say Robert the Bruce. I would just say Robert the Bruce. We're going to be back, final segment, talking to Andrew McDiarmid. The podcast is Simply Scottish. We'll be right back. Folks, it's incumbent upon me, before I continue my conversation with Andrew McDiarmid about Scotland and Braveheart and technology, to remind you that we are, for these next 2 weeks, continuing our campaign to free slaves in the Sudan. It's one of the most amazing things we've ever had the privilege of doing. And if you haven't participated, I just want to tell you, this is a big deal. Please go to metaxastalk.com. You'll see the banner at the very, very top. But this is something magnificent that we get to participate in. CSI wanted us to continue the campaign beyond the first of the year, so we're doing that now. If you have not participated, I just want to tell you that it really doesn't get more exciting than this, when something wickedly evil can be turned around 100% by you. So just go to metaxastalk.com and you'll see the banner. Get your kids involved. This is just a beautiful opportunity. A few minutes left with Andrew McDiarmid. So Andrew, we're talking about your podcast, Simply Scottish. We're talking about technology, Robert the Bruce. It's kind of funny. Braveheart is one of those films that it has become a classic. It's an amazing thing how people reference it. And Mel Gibson's performance in that is just famous now, absolutely famous.
Yeah, everyone likes to root for the underdog. But again, I do think that it's Randall Wallace's craft with the storytelling that makes it continue to resonate. This is not just the story of some dude that got into war and, did his thing. This is how he espoused freedom. Even when his country didn't have freedom, he got to live that spirit of freedom in the woman he loved, in the king that he inspired, Robert the Bruce, in his friends, even, as Randall Wallace points out in my interview with him, even the crowd that comes to watch his execution is inspired and wowed by how William handles himself at the very end of his life. This is someone who gave his life for Scotland, but also for the greater ideal of freedom. And Eric, as you know, freedom is just a wonderful theme to think about in the digital age. And it gets us back to Jacques Ellul, the philosopher of technology. He thought that we as Christians and even non-Christians can affirm our freedom, but we have to take over. We have to say thanks, but no thanks to big tech. We have to say, I'll take some of your services, but I'm in charge here, okay? I'm the one that's going to set the limits. I'm the one that's going to hit the power button and turn it off at the right time, and I'm going to affirm my freedom in this technological age.
Well, it's interesting because when you put it that way, it strikes me that freedom is at the very heart of what it is to be human. There's no escaping it. That if you're a human being, whether you like it or not, whether you act on it or not, you have a choice, either to be free, to be fully human, to live courageously, to live with faith, or not. And the temptations not to do those things are infinite and everywhere, in every generation, in different ways. And we're, of course, facing it in a new way today with technology and with other things that have encroached upon us. But at the heart of it all is this idea of freedom, which is inevitably a biblical idea. I just spoke to Oz Guinness at a Socrates in the City, which will be airing later this month, about how Moses and the Israelites at Sinai, in a way, showed the world the first example of what this is, to leave bondage, to be free. It's just amazing. Lots more to talk about, but we're out of time. Andrew McDiarmid, I'm just so glad for at least this initial opportunity to speak with you. Folks, check out Simply Scottish, the podcast. Check out Discovery Institute. Check out Andrew McDiarmid. And Andrew, thank you so much.
Eric, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Folks, this is your daily reminder to please go to mypillow.com or mystore.com, and to get huge savings, use the code ERIC. If you don't believe me, here's some celebrity friends.
Mama said to use the code ERIC.
Use the code ERIC.